Hello, this is Karen Johnson with another in our series of the Proctors History Committee tapings about the history of Proctors. We're trying to preserve that history and have a little fun with it as well. And today as our guest we have Sandy Boynton, who was one of the early stagehands at Proctors and still today working. And we're going to talk a little bit about all the experiences you've had. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little about some of an early job you had or what early memories of Proctors.
In fact, after Proctors stopped being a movie theater and was sold to the committee that I believe still holds the title?
ACTS. Art Center and Theater of Schenectady.
The second show here, I believe, was a rental, and it was a rental for Capitol Opera, and that Capitol Opera was a local non-paid chorus with principals pulled out of New York City. I was working at Russell Sage College at the time, and I was asked to costume design that production here at Proctors. So I don't know if when we walked into this building, I believe there were puddles of water on the main stage floor. All of the dressing rooms were impressive, astonishingly unkempt, old plumbing that you really couldn't trust. And it was this huge production with a chorus of 40 or 50, La Boheme, wonderful principals out of New York, a New York City director. But we were so busy, I had a student assistant from Russell Sage. We didn't even iron the backs of the costumes. It was old-fashioned opera where everybody parked and barked and stood still. So you didn't have to iron the strip up the middle of the back because they never turned their backs on the audience. And we were so busy.
I'm going to try that at home.
But then you can't ever turn around. You can't turn around. You've got to keep your back to the wall the entire time. Now, if you can do that, you're fine. But that's what we did to save time. And then we, ironed the backs of the principals when we had time because they would turn around. But it was a beautiful, astonishing, horrifyingly bedraggled old dame of a theater at that point. I always thought that it felt, when I first walked in, the stage felt angry. I mean, I've never felt a room that was so angry about what had happened to it. It was, I'm sounding kind of like a crazy woman and kind of ooga booga, but the room was distraught with what had happened to it. And over the years that has changed entirely, but it was, boy, was it an angry space.
Now, I was involved in that show as well because I wrote a grant for CETA workers to work backstage.
Yes.
And we got the grant, and I was possibly on the board of that organization briefly. But then we went home and we got all dressed up in evening dress and sat in the dress circle, and it was quite the elegant, from one side of the stage was quite the elegant, but I think I remember a cloud of dust.
Oh,
Is
and a
that
Hardy
possible?
Heil silver, absolutely. There was so much dust, dirt, grime. I know it sounds so bleak, but it was really a bleak space because it just was. You remember the old skylight in the Proctors, in the original Stagehouse's roof. That had gotten so leaky that it was almost dangerous to be on stage.
So after this wonderful experience, you've stayed at Proctors and served in what capacities?
Oh, goodness, a lot of stuff. Off and on now. I worked as a stagehand, and stagehands, by and large in the Capital District, are part-time employees. We have other jobs, and we do professional stage work on an as-needed, on-call basis. So I've worked in higher education. I worked for Adirondack Scenic in their shops. I've taught on the road. I've worked in the Dominican Republic. So I've been all over the place. But here, immediately after the Capitol Opera, I've forgotten you had worked on that, production, I was picked up by the then house crew at Proctors. House crew at Proctors was a non-union crew of stagehands, some of whom were employed full-time, but most of whom were also on an on-call basis. I was very much always on call to work in performances and productions that were non-union. That means we were the basis of the crew. For instance, when Schenectady Light Opera Company was doing stuff at Proctors, they had professional stagehands, albeit non-union ones, to make sure that the plant was taken care of properly and that people didn't get in over their heads with, at that point, really aging equipment that we all loved, but knew it wasn't modern. It was 1920s equipment. You had to have some feeling for stuff that old and feeling for stuff that sometimes fragile. So I worked at Proctors on the deck. I was a stagehand. I was a carpenter.
What's a carpenter?
A carpenter backstage doesn't build scenery. Basically, we pushed it around, assembled it on the deck, put the set up, and then push it around, move it when necessary. A specialty as a carpenter of the carpentry versions are the flymen who bring things in and out on a counterweight system. I worked as a properties person. All the stuff, all the little stuff that actors handle that decorates the set, properties. And they also, properties also has the designation, we bring in the coffee and set up the coffee station, because theater runs on two things, donuts and coffee, trust me. I'm not kidding about that. I would work occasionally as an electrician.
Now what is that?
Setting up the lighting. I would run a board occasionally, a lighting board occasionally. I worked wardrobe, and wardrobe can be everything from quick changes to doing laundry and keeping actors fresh and clean and the clothes maintained. So I've done all of that. Now, pretty much at my age, I'm principally a wardrobe woman. But all the way through, I've worked all of it. In fact, I've done some really odd things. Proctors hired me as a chauffeur once to drive around a company that was putting together an original production at Proctors, and I was the driver for everybody. I was hired as an animal wrangler, because in one of the Christmas shows, there was a horse on stage, a great, big, beautiful workhorse pulling a carriage. But you had to have somebody with some experience with handling animals. Well, in college, I rode all the time. So they hired me as an animal wrangler to handle a workhorse backstage so that she was comfortable with all the stuff whizzing around. I mean, no horse. I don't think we have that many trained theatrical animals in this area. But I was the horse wrangler on that show. Funny. And they hired me another year to do the Christmas show, to narrate it. So I've done it, a lot of stuff here. Oh, I guess the other thing is that with Bruce Coonley and a couple of my students and other stagehands, we made all the black curtains that now grace the stage.
The ones that keep you from being able to
Yep,
see
all the blacks,
backstage.
all the black.
What do you call those? Flies?
No, well, blacks actually is what they're called, the black drapes. Things go up into the flies. The narrow skinny ones are wings. The ones across the top are borders. And the big panels are just draw curtains.
Well, you've certainly done everything. So
I've
I
tried.
think it would be real interesting to maybe catch up on your background and how you got interested in the theater, and maybe what your last things you've done in SCCC have been.
Wow, I'm old. It's a long time. So, I'm 5. Please, at this point, I'm 5. And it's the Christmas show, and the teacher tells my mother that they will need a narrator, and there is a long poem that has to be memorized and recited. And I got it. I got to be the narrator. And I was scared to death because I didn't think I could memorize anything, because I'm 5 and I don't know anything about memorizing. I could do that, and I could memorize. And then they clapped. They they clapped and 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 they could understand me. And I felt pretty good about myself. I thought that was pretty terrific. So I decided I wanted to do theater for the rest of my life because it made me feel so good. 2 years later, I was the Mrs. Santa Claus narrator for the entire elementary school Christmas show. I'm 7. The teachers lined the acts up. Every grade did an act. They lined them up out of order. And I could see that in the wings. I'm 7. I changed my narration to fit what I was getting handed by the faculty who had screwed up royally. And even my mother agreed I should go into the theater at that point. Because
Well,
it was
you had
just
the ability to improvise for sure.
sure, but it was, I understood. I could account for a mistake, take care of it. The audience never knew. And it took the teachers finally to go, oh my God, how does she, oh well, that's what she does. And that's who I've been ever since.
Tell me about the formal education you had in drama and theater.
Well, a lot of formal and informal. I was lucky enough to attend St. Lawrence University in the 60s. I was an English and theater major. Worked with some terrific old Yaleys. Picked up a lot of stuff. In fact, my first director in college was the first woman to get an MFA in directing from Yale in the 40s, when women weren't really allowed to do such things. Really interesting. From then on, I went to Albany State, picked up a degree in theater at Albany State. And I suppose the other thing that's really important, last degree in theater, in the 70s, up to 2004, I got selected to go to the American Shakespeare's, the National Endowment on the Humanities program, Shakespeare's Theaters Inside and Out. It was a 5-week program at the American Shakespeare Center in Stanton, Virginia, where they have a replica of Shakespeare's Indoor Theater and the Globe in London. And it was a study tour for professionals, and it was intentionally done for academics and theater professionals, and it was a combination of the two of us, working to see how the academic and the theater professional complement each other in the production and the study of Shakespeare. And it was fun because I was one of the few people there who was both an academic and a professional, because I've made most of my money, most of my life, teaching in higher education. So I always brought the professional theater to the classroom and was able to bring the classroom into what I do professionally. Kind of fun.
So have you been an actress in all this? Or?
At times, mostly these days, I look at myself as a director, but I still act. And if anybody has an acting job they want, you can contact my agent, Karen Johnson, and I'd be glad to talk to you. I prefer to be paid. And I act some, I direct a lot still. And I was a costume designer. I do everything in the theater that has to do with fabric. From building the draperies, as I said, from building stage draperies, and I did that professionally for a lot of years. Stage draperies and soft scenery, to wardrobe and costume, like internationally, I guess. I'm not famous. There's no big deal about it. The only reason that I got thinking when I was in the Dominican Republic, because I was working with really interesting people, first-rate people, and all of a sudden I'm in my 40s and I'm thinking about it, and it's, how did I get here? Because I'm nobody. And I just realized sometimes it's just longevity, that by longevity you start having worked with people over and over, or become in places to work with people. My favorite memory on Proctor stage, and it's might be my favorite memory in my lifetime. Well, there's 2 of them, and they're both Proctors. But the first one, Ella Fitzgerald was singing, and I got hired to work the Ella Fitzgerald show. I got to talk to Ella Fitzgerald. It doesn't get any. It doesn't, and she was a great lady. It doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't get any better than that,
That's exciting.
Oh, I still tell that to college kids, Yeah, I talked to Ella Fitzgerald.
So when you get hired as a stagehand, does someone else just decide what you're going to do? It depends what they need?
For
Or are
me,
you
it very
kind of a
often depended.
specialist?
For me, it depended on what they need. But at the same time, there were a lot of years that I called myself the midnight stitcher. The shows I would be on a call, and the shows, especially of folks who come back and forth all the time who knew me, would save up all their stage drapes to be repaired. And after a performance was down, I'd come in at midnight and stay till 3, 4, 5 in the morning and do all the repairs. So that that could be done. The funniest one was when Camelot came through with Richard Harris. One of the drops was, a good 15 feet too long. So we cut it apart on the deck. I took it out in the parking lot and we sewed it back together because they needed to do work on the deck. So we need to have a space. So there's me out in the parking lot with stagehands keeping the drop up off the ground so it wouldn't get torn or dirty. And Richard Harris over my shoulder saying, "Are you going to get it done? Are you going to get it done? Are you going to get?" And
That was helpful. Got much pressure?
I think I had the presence of mind to say it'll get done faster if you just leave me alone. Or at least in my memory, that's what I think I said. I probably did.
Probably what you should have said.
I think it is really what I should have said, but I probably didn't. I think I did a hearty hi-oh, yes, sir, and left it at that. It's
Well,
fine.
you and I have had conversations about building costumes when you've worked with students and you're teaching them, and you explained to me that for almost every dress that comes on the stage, you have to have the underwear first.
Oh, absolutely.
And I never thought about that.
Absolutely. The fashions of any given age are designed to fit a specific shape. And if you don't replicate that shape, the clothes are going to look wrong. They're not going to look like the pictures or the photos or the paintings that we think about. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that if the underwear that goes under the clothes, is it all the supportive underwear like an Elizabethan corset or a Victorian corset or a Civil War era corset, it changes how the person can move and how they can use their arms, what about their body, how they hold their bodies, how they can walk, what they can be next to. I mean, you might not think of it. We did a show at Schenectady County Community College where I had Civil War clothes. All my girls had handmade Victorian corsets, or Civil War era corsets. We laced them in, they got them weeks before they went on so that we could tighten them down and get the shape right. Their backs straightened, their postures straightened, how they used their arms got amazing. Then I had to build the hoop skirt for the lady who was the plantation owner's wife. Now, it was a 6-foot diameter hoop skirt. She had to learn to sit down. She had to learn to stand up. She had to learn to walk upstairs and not trip. We could only dress her in the hall at the back of the theater. Nobody ever saw this. We did it. We got the audience in, started the show, and then we dressed her in the hall. It was the only place that we could spread the dress out over the hoop so that then she could get on stage. And I don't even want to tell you what she had to do to go to the bathroom. I'll leave that to your imagination, but she couldn't use a modern toilet without help.
So how did you learn all that? And
Do you know,
why
Karen,
do you
I
have-
don't know.
Do you have an affinity toward sewing among all the skills you have?
The first
I'm sure
time
directing is
I-
more fun, but
No, it's just an odd piece of business, I think. The first time I picked up a needle, I was 2. And my grandmother showed me how to sew a button onto something because I had been teasing her. I was very articulate, very young. And so I was teasing to be able to learn to sew. So she showed me how to sew a button on. By the time I was 16, I was making suits because I found it interesting. And half the things that I know how to do with fabric, I don't know how I learned it. I just know that inherently it made sense to me to do it, what has almost always been the right way. And I don't get it. I just know it's just one of those things that I've done. And so it makes sense to me. And when you start reading about how people use their clothes and how they put their clothes together and stuff, it all makes such interesting sense about how the clothes influence human behavior, and then influence the world. I'm being very serious. They're both a mirror and a stricture at the same time. A permission. You get the Greeks, for instance, in those beautiful, lovely, flowing clothes with those beautiful, lovely, flowing brains. Do you see what I mean? It seems to be that one mirrors the other very, very much. And as you see the world become, I don't know, more contentious, I don't know. You see the clothes constrict people into forms and shapes that are considered ideal. I saw a terrible photograph someplace yesterday, I think, of a waist on a woman that could not have been any bigger than this. It was a picture of a Victorian or a late Civil War corset, and her waist had to be no bigger than this. Shoulders out here, squeezed onto this tiny waist, and hips that ballooned out like. I wonder what that does to a human being's spirit to be so constricted in the middle.
So when is it an apprentice business if other people come and work in wardrobe? Are they apprenticing to begin to learn some of these things, younger people?
It's kind of hard. There's university training and some high schools have pretty good programs that teach people elementary skills. The first thing is that if you don't sew, this becomes a difficulty. Fewer and fewer people come in with that rudimentary, I thought every woman learned how to do this at grandma or mommy's knee kind of sewing ability. They don't have it. I thought everybody, in my generation, everybody knew how to iron. We knew how to starch a shirt. I knew how to do every kind of mending. I can darn a sock. Has anybody thought about darning a sock in 30 years? But I can do it. And I've occasionally done it here because the socks are specific and you can't get another sock, so you darn the sock. You can learn in a university program. And in some ways, if you want to really move up the ladder, picking up all those old-fashioned skills that you need to do a Victorian era corset, for instance. That's a different style of sewing than is done with knits and other kinds of modern clothing and stuff. You can very often now at Proctors, the non-union crew is long since gone. Everything here is union, and the difficult thing is that there's very few shows or very few places you can go to just informally learn this stuff. At a union called Proctors, they're not hiring people who don't know what they're doing or aren't pretty close. So without skills, a skill-free person probably wouldn't be.
And there isn't enough work to really
to manage it full time. If you, it's a real rock and a hard place. I would guess that the best place to go to learn this stuff informally would be a good community theater that does build costumes instead of rent them. I suppose, but it's so Schenectady local, that one could get a job at the Costumer, which is the local costume rental organization house, and most communities don't have one, and get a job at the Costumer to learn skills in the shop. But it would be one or two people,
at the
maybe.
most.
I just don't know of a good place. The only place, of course, the good thing would be in this area, the summer theater scene is so huge that there are places there, but then the seasons work so fast that they're really not interested in starting people who don't know anything.
So let's move on. You did tell us that you are still working for Proctors as a stagehand. So we're talking about 1979 is when you started, and today. What are the changes that you've seen? What is it like today to work here?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, when we first walked in, it was dirty, it was dangerous, it was. Nobody even really knew where everything was. I mean, it was a sort of. It was kind of cave spelunking to find out where things were and what was going on, and no one really did know, and there would be panels of electrical stuff on the wall, and nobody quite knew what.
They were probably right to be afraid to touch it.
I was. Oh, I saw a couple of sparks fly. It was terrifying. It kind of terrifying because you didn't know, and nobody. I mean, nobody really used that counterweight system, for instance, for I have no idea how long, until it was actually being put back to a regular kind of use. That's how people get hurt. I mean, that sort of equipment. What were the changes? Well, of course,
tell me about today.
The immediate changes were that I'll talk about it in terms of what I talked about the unhappy, angry room. As shows came in, as everything got cleaner. I mean, obviously, things got cleaner, things got picked up. People figured out what was in that panel. We got better equipment. We replaced some things that were. I mean, the old lighting board was, I don't even want to try to describe it to you, it was terror. Things got better. The room relaxed. The room calmed down. Things got better. And it was almost as though you could promise the room it was going to get better. In fact, the old main rag, I don't know if you remember the old main drape in the front. Mm-hmm. Do you remember when it was literally tearing off the. And there was not money to replace it. It was literally at the reinforcing webbing at the top. The mm-hmm. main drapery was falling apart. So I got hired. I came in and we brought the drapery to the floor, and I put a sewing machine on a dolly, and I reinforced the top of that drape. So they got about 3 more years of use out of that, till there was enough money to do the significantly expensive drape that would be needed to replace that. And it isn't just the fabric, it's just so big that have to be done professionally and done out of and done with, it's just expensive. So that changed. Slowly over the years, things just got better. But then Proctors outgrew itself. And it was really interesting. I worked Les Mis. And Les Mis is a huge show. And backstage, you wouldn't have known it from out, but before the new stage house was built, Les Mis was the biggest show that could go into Proctors. Mm-hmm. The set literally ran from wherever it was toward the audience to the back wall of the stage, and it ran side to side. In order to get from one side of the stage to the other, if you were not in the scene, you had to go down to the basement, run across the floor, dart up the stairs, and hope you made it for the next scene. In fact, it was so bad that the quick changes for the chorus were done behind screens in the arcade. And at that point, the shows, which had grown in size from a huge show, the first Chicago that came through here, had 2 trucks. Now it's routinely 18 to 20. But to get those shows in, that's when the stage house had to come to the ground. And F.F. Proctor's idea of what was a brilliant stage house had to be replaced by a modern electronic whiz-bang miracle that is what Proctors is today. So that now backstage is roomy. There's plenty of space backstage for quick changes, and there's space that I'm sure the audience doesn't realize behind the main stage where they're lit up quick change areas. Not changing clothes in the dark is a big deal.
It's faster.
Oh, it's easier, and you don't poke pins into people. But I'm mostly in the quick change of the in the dark and with a headlamp.
Well, I can see you've had a lot of adventures. Is there anything else that you want to talk to us about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, don't be frightened. Don't be frightened. Because the other thing that I really haven't spoken about is that I was on the 440 board, And I actually was among the people selected to look at candidates to succeed Gloria. So I was around when Philip Morris was hired. What I thought was really interesting, and this is a downtown story more than anything else, people, the entire time I'd been around Proctors, talked over and over and over again how they wanted the downtown to be fixed, to be better. I heard stories about retail. I heard stories about needing to buy socks downtown. Nostalgia about when GE and 40,000 people on Thursday nights, all of that. I heard lots of people, and everything that had been tried to pick up the downtown and make it what it is now, or what it is in the process of becoming now, did not work. And it was Harry Abkarian and eventually Philip who honestly believed, and they were laughed at, that the arts could become a focus and a generator of enough, a generator, it doesn't matter what, to make the downtown functioning again. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's really warming, heartwarming, exciting, emblematic of what I think could be a change in the entire world, of looking at the arts organizations, the artistic way of looking at the world, which is more trial and error and much less dogma. And Schenectady, New York, the downtown, is an example of what the arts can do for not just a city, but for the world. End of rant.
That was a very nice benediction to our show, and Sandy Boynton, I'd like to thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. This is July 15th, 2016, and we very much appreciate your watching this production of the Schenectady Proctors Historical Committee, which is trying to preserve, remember, cherish, and learn from the past of Proctors.